usual. Thank you. Anyways, good evening and welcome. My name's Andrew Roth. I'm a scholar in residence and a member of the board of directors at the Jefferson Educational Society. Welcome to tonight's JES Global Summit event, the future of college athletics and sports media. Where are they now? Where are they headed? Featuring Adrian Wojnarowski. I want to thank tonight's sponsor, Gannon University, the JES team under the leadership and direction of President Furky Ferrati, the Global Summit sponsors and partners, the logos of which you've seen on the screen earlier this evening. And of course, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. This is the 7th of 17 events. The very next one occurs on Wednesday, day after tomorrow, October 29th, as we welcome famed astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson to Erie at the Bayfront Convention Center. Tonight's event, however, is special to me for several reasons. First, before I got involved writing and presenting for the JES, I had the honor to serve as the president of St. Bonaventure University, which 2 of our grandsons now attend. Many of you, on the other hand, know Woj from his time at ESPN and how he left a prestigious media position to return to his alma mater, St. Bonaventure University. There's a saying at Bonas, once a Bonnie, always a Bonnie, and there's a number of Bonnies in the room. Would all the Bonnies in the room, if you don't want to stand up, at least raise your hand? Woj returned because he wanted to give back to a campus that's given him very much. We'll hear about that tonight and about his work in media and the work he's now doing at St. Bonaventure. Tonight's also special to me because during the course of my career in academics, I launched and coached a college team that qualified for the NCAA Final Four, and at multiple institutions worked using athletics to build enrollment, brand identity, and school spirit. Now, with the veil of amateurism lifted, I wonder how different that experience would be. I can think of no better place to have tonight's conversation trying to answer that question than on the college campus where I began my career. This is really kind of stunning to me. 55 years ago this fall. That's just a private moment of shock. In any event, thank you to tonight's event sponsor, Gannon University, to its president, Walter Iwanenko, and to his team for their continued support and partnership with the JES on the Global Summit, hosting not just this event, but prior events where I saw many of you and future ones, including Thursday, November 6th event featuring Ambassador Michael McFaul. To introduce tonight's guest, please join me in offering a warm JES and Global Summit welcome to Gannon University and St. Bonaventure alum, to Gannon University Director of Sports Communications, Isaac Petcash.
Somewhat similar colors between Gannon and St. Bonaventure, so though we'll take it. There's a little bit of different color mixed in there. Good evening, everyone. We are very lucky to have everyone here tonight. My name is Isaac Petcash. I'm the Director of Athletic Communications and Creative Content for Gannon University, and a former TV reporter myself, so I can sympathize in a way with Woj for the years of service that he had. We're very thankful for our collaboration with the Jefferson Educational Society and the opportunity to host another installment of one of its global speaker series. Thanks to this partnership, our Gannon community had the chance to not only attend these events, thought-provoking and more, but also engage with programming that enriches both educational and professional development. Tonight's discussion invites us to think deeply about how athletics, institutions, media, and the student-athlete experience are evolving over time. As we navigate these changing landscapes, we can reflect on how we respond with integrity, innovation, and purpose. And for our Gannon students and many student athletes in particular in the audience and watching live tonight, this is an opportunity and a timely chance to consider your own journey, whether inside or outside of athletics, and how it can engage with the broad themes that lead towards meaningful impact in yours and others' lives. So now we turn to our featured speaker for the evening, and hopefully attempt to answer the question that's been going on for maybe over a year now. Why did Adrian Wojnarowski take a 99% pay cut in 2024? Quote, to save the team he loves. So wrote New York Magazine's Bruce Schoenfeld earlier this year. Woj, who is widely considered the best in the business as ESPN's senior NBA insider, gave up that $20 million remaining on his contract at ESPN to become the first ever general manager of St. Bonaventure University's men's basketball program. A 1991 Bonnie's graduate, Woj wanted to go home to help the school he felt shaped his life and career. And what better way to help them navigate that, the new, confusing, and confounding world of big-time college sports, than to be present himself. After a career in which he was repeatedly honored as one of the best sports writers in America, Woj is helping St. Bonaventure manage name, image, and likeness, opportunities, the transfer portal, coordinating relationships for recruits, family and alumni players, as well as handling professional player programs and program fundraising. Man, maybe he does miss his career in TV with all that he's doing at St. Bonaventure. So tonight, he will talk about the future of collegiate athletics and sports media, where they're now and where they are headed. So tonight, I ask you to join me in welcoming the man that they call Woj to the Jefferson Global Summit, the multi-talented and true sports expert, Adrian Wojnarowski.
Ladies and gentlemen, one more round of applause for a welcome for Adrian Wojnarowski. So Adrian, I think that's a place to start. People are wondering, the decision, September 18th, 2024, you announced to your many followers on X, formerly known as Twitter, that you are, in fact, making a pivot. Now, I'm going to date myself with some of the younger people in the audience, but that was a bit of a Seinfeld moment, right? Go out on top, and you're walking away from this to do something different. Take us not to that moment, the announcement, but the before, the decision leading up to that. Why make such a change?
First of all, wonderful to be here tonight at Gannon and in Erie, and appreciate you guys having us in. I just felt over the last year, I would say into September, that previous trade deadline in February and then free agency, I just felt like I had done everything I wanted to do in the business. But as much as anything, I was pulled very much toward going back to Bonaventure, trying to be helpful during a time that's, especially for schools like Bonaventure, who don't have the resources, the revenue streams, massive alumni base. We have a very loyal, dedicated alumni base, as you could see here tonight. But you know, there's schools in our league in the Atlantic 10 that have more they have more students in their student body than we have living alumni. And so you just do the math on trying to compete. It makes it a little harder. But I just felt that job that I did at ESPN, and I just knew what was required to do it at the level that I would want to do it at, and that I felt, if I'm being honest with myself, and that I didn't want to meet that requirement anymore. And again, if not for the opportunity at Bonaventure and my conversations with them about going back, I might have done another year, and if I did, it would have been a mistake. It really would have been a mistake. The best reason I could think of at the end to stay in that job was the money, and it wasn't a good enough reason for me.
And I want to go to that journey of you getting there, because I think a lot of people became incredibly familiar with your work because of your knack and ability to really break the way that news was broken. But it took you a while to get there. It was in your mid to late 30s that you make the transition to Yahoo. Talk about what it was like to, I think, be recognized somewhat as an overnight success story, but that a decade plus is a bit of a long night. Tell us about that journey to getting to that point.
Yeah, I wanted to be a sports writer, and I went to Bonaventure. I worked at the Hartford Courant through my junior year, senior year of high school, part-time, and then went to Bonaventure. And with the hope that I could learn this craft, get better at it, and just get a job at some paper in the Northeast. And, the Courant was a great newspaper when I was an intern and a part-timer, and I would get bylines. They covered everything, in the Northeast, all the pro teams, and, did a lot of national stuff. And if you handed me a 40-year contract when I graduated from Bonaventure and said, you can go to the Hartford Courant, you can cover University of Hartford basketball in the winter, cover the, various college tournaments in the spring, do the American Legion, New England regionals in the summer, I would have signed up for it. I remember once, my wife Amy's here and she knows who I'm talking about. We were, I was in my dorm room maybe my junior or senior year, and we were talking about what we might all want to do when we graduated, and one of the guys in the room was going to go to law school. And he looked at me and said, he goes, you think I'm going to be like that guy and make $50,000 a year as a sports writer? And I knew he was insulting me. I knew it was an insult. But in my mind, I was like, wow, he thinks I'm going to make $50,000 someday? And so, I just imagine being a sports writer. And I would say the trajectory of my career changed when I left. I had been in Waterbury, Connecticut for 4 years, covering UConn and some other stuff. Went to Fresno, California, covered Jerry Tarkanian for a wild 2.5 years, and then came back east at the Record in New Jersey. I was at the Record for 10 years, and I was at Yahoo for 10 years before I went to ESPN. And Yahoo was like a startup, and we had a group of guys and women who, that was fun. We built something that wasn't there in sports. We kind of created an identity for that site, which was pretty neat. And then took on the challenge at ESPN, but certainly not an overnight success. I would say I wrote a book in my early 30s, The Miracle of St. Anthony, on Bob Hurley Sr., and spent a year at an inner city Catholic high school in Jersey City, and was proud of that, probably as proud of anything I've done. And that got me some notoriety. It got on the New York Times list for a couple of weeks. But for the most part, it was, went to Yahoo at 37, probably by 38, probably I'm 39 in 2010 when LeBron goes to Miami. I would say LeBron and Chris Bosh going to the Heat changed my profession. It changed that job I had, that there became this obsession and great appetite among the audience for the trades and the free agent deals. And now players were starting to get together and talk about playing with certain teams. And then everything that led up to those big deals happening, and then Twitter comes, and Yahoo had this tremendous reach on the internet. And so I was very much a beneficiary of timing when I came along and decided to just do the NBA. I would love to tell you it was by some great design. It wasn't. The only thing I saw when I left, I was a general columnist, and we all grew up wanting to be, Mike Lupica or Bob Ryan or Mitch Albom or, the general columnist. They'd be on the front page. You got to go to the Super Bowl, the Olympics, the World Series. And I did that for a long time. But you could kind of see that the world was headed towards specialization, that the internet was sending you toward specializing in one thing now. And then, Adam Schefter and, now Jeff Passan, who does baseball, who, he and I came up together at Yahoo, Pete Thamel on colleges, and, specializing on one thing was going to have value. And I thought going toward that with the NBA, but I would never tell you I would imagine, or that I ever imagined, that it would all get as big as it got.
When you talked about knowing that you wanted to be a sports writer and, being in newsrooms early, including meeting your wife in the newsroom at St. Bonaventure, the two of you working together, when did the drive bite you? When did you have that when you realized you wanted to be the guy in this changing landscape, that you wanted to be the name that was synonymous with breaking news, that people would turn to you? When did that turn on for you?
Well, I would say I remember sitting in the newsroom at the Hartford Courant my senior year of high school, second or third. I hadn't been there very long. And they had a great columnist named Alan Greenberg who had come from the LA Times. And he had written this really controversial column in the Courant that day. And back then, readers would just call the newsroom angry, and my job was to answer the phone. Now, when you answer the phone, it could be mostly it was people would call in their scores, like the high school box score. Joe Smith, 2 baskets, 1 free throw, 5 points. And you go through the list and add, and you type in the box score in your little roundup. But that night, it was just hundreds of angry phone calls about Alan Greenberg's column. And I remember just sitting there going, this is awesome. This guy, everybody read this guy's column. He made people feel something. And I said, what better job is there than that? And so that's where I remember feeling like what a great environment that was. I would say the breaking news just evolved over time, where people, again, there just became this tremendous appetite. And it was only a part of what I did. I did a lot of writing. Sometimes people, they just focused on that one part of it, and I think it seemed like that's all I was doing. But I can't make people read the stories, and I still did lots of long pieces, maybe less as the years went on, but it became part of you look at readers' habits, consumers' habits, it's changed, right? Like it's getting in the Instagram reels now. It's funny, when I came back to Bonaventure, I think Isaac read from the New York Times Sunday magazine piece. And that was, for Bonaventure, that was a big deal to be in the Sunday New York Times magazine. And Bruce wrote a great piece and followed me around for 5 days, driving through the snow, Bucknell to Toronto on a recruiting trip back down. And I would tell you that when I went on Carmelo Anthony's podcast and I was in the Instagram reels, like clips of Carmelo and I'm not sure that didn't have a much greater weight than being in the Sunday New York Times magazine. And I don't know that, there would have been a time where that would have sounded absurd, but it doesn't now. It's just the world's changed and how people consume information has changed. And so I kind of felt like maybe we were at the beginning of that, when there's this tremendous appetite for breaking news and information. And now the general managers were becoming celebrities and stories on themselves, and who won the trade and all the little deals that went on around the games. You had the games, which had their interest, but you had this, it was almost like when you cover college sports, there would be your college sports team and then the recruiting, right? You're a Penn State football fan, but you're pretty locked in on Penn State recruiting. And the NBA, it kind of became that, right? You had the games, and then you had this whole other world of transactions that people, the more you gave, it was like this monster that that wanted to be fed all the time.
And speaking of that, in the hunger there, you referenced that New York Times magazine piece, and I think it was in that piece that Bruce was talking about that at a time in your life you had a driver and you wouldn't go far distances because you were afraid you're going to miss a text or you're going to miss an update. But yet here you are in the car driving to Bucknell with him. You're driving to Toronto. What was that transition like for you? Was it freeing, exhilarating, exhausting, lonely? What was it like to put the phone down, get behind the wheel, and not worry about missing an update?
I had not driven, my wife will tell you, like, we'd be driving the family somewhere, and how many times I had to pull over on the side of the road to wait. She's remembering now, yeah. To wait on news, to break news, And it wasn't fun. It's funny, but it wasn't, Amy would refer to my phone as the fifth family member. It was the fifth uninvited family member. It came on vacation with you. It came to dinner with you. It came to bed with you. It was always there. It was not terribly welcome there, but I'm on my phone a lot, and there's all these different constituencies now with recruiting and agents and fundraising and your own players and your academic person and your trainer, but there's nobody like now. I shut my phone off, and there's nobody that I can't call back when I leave here who would call me, and that's nice. And there's nobody I have to pull over on the side of the road for. I did miss driving. I almost never, except around town in our town, but because you were always, the one thing about that job was you always had to be in place and position. Sometimes you knew something was coming. Sometimes things came out of the blue. And so it was liberating in that way. But I'm not sure I work less now than I did, but it's certainly more gratifying and fulfilling doing what I'm doing now than maybe how I felt about the other job at the end.
So one of the things clearly you're known for is the Woj bomb. How many people, audience participation, show of hands, you're familiar with what the Woj bomb is? So a good show of hands, but since we have the man himself here, how do you define a Woj bomb? And maybe the better question is, when did the first one go off? Did you know it was going to happen?
I have no idea. I don't know. I don't even really remember when it started. I think it was a thing on Twitter, breaking news. I couldn't tell you what year, or was it off of one story? I think it was, maybe there's some college student's gonna do a senior thesis on where it started.
University students, St.
Yeah.
Bonaventure students in the room, this is a great project, take it on.
I don't know, but it kind of became part of the vernacular, I guess, and probably sometime around 2010, 11, when, like I said, after that free agency, when LeBron went to Miami, and now you had a run of like LeBron went to Miami, and then, Chris Paul had his whole thing going to the Clippers, almost to the Lakers, to the Clippers. Then Carmelo Anthony leaving Denver, ended up in New York. So you had a string of kind of guys leaving smaller markets for bigger markets. And I think that just accelerated people's appetite for the big story.
Can you give us a few of the ingredients of the secret sauce that I think it would take to gain that level of trust from owners, from players, from insiders, and how that, I might suspect, now translates to the work you're doing as general manager? People still texting and trusting you. How did people come to trust you, Adrian?
It's probably a better question for them. I would say just showing up the same way every day, being there, getting out and seeing people. When I went to Yahoo, they really allowed me to get out, and you had to explain to a lot of the older NBA. I remember when I first started at Yahoo, like Jerry West or Donnie Walsh in Indiana, legendary GMs, like you kind of had to explain to them what Yahoo was. The younger agents, the younger executives, they would go to Yahoo. It was their homepage on the internet, and they would get their mail there. They would look at maybe their stocks, the weather, their entertainment news, and then, we had sports out there too. They knew what it was, and so I spent early on trying to get to know the younger guys, and then you kind of built your credibility kind of from the bottom up. But I would say over time, I think consistency with people. That doesn't mean they always loved what you reported or they wished you hadn't reported it, but they understood I had a job to do, and I respected they had a job to do. And often, that didn't always, in journalism, that doesn't always, sometimes that collides, and that means you're doing your job right. But I think being forthright with people, I always thought the way you had to do that job was, I would laugh at people and say, well, he just talks to the GMs or he just talks to the agents. Or to do that job right, you had to, and I think this is true in any walk of journalism, you've got to be able to have relationships to fully understand the whole picture with every constituency, right? I had to be able to deal with the league office and the Players Association, the owners, the general managers, the coaches, the players, the agents. And if you only looked at the sport or the business through any one of their eyes, you would get a very narrow picture of the whole sport. But when you when you talked to everybody and you understood everybody's perspective on a particular issue, you're able to tell the broader story of what is happening. And so for me, it was always important to have lots of strong relationships in all those places. And I always thought you got a good view of the league, because often all of those people while they're in the same industry, their agendas are different. And they're telling their own truths, but you kind of need to see the whole picture. And I think people appreciated maybe that I came at it that way. I am not going to just tell this story through your eyes. You're going to have a voice in this, but there's other sides to this, and I tried to always handle it that way.
Let's look at if such a thing exists, the average day in the life of the general manager, what that's like now, and what lessons you've taken from an illustrious career in journalism and broadcasting into that. What does an average day for you look like, aside from now you can get behind the wheel and drive around more?
The things that are the same, I spent 30 plus years, however long, talking to coaches, talking to players, talking to agents, and I do that every day. Instead of talking to I talk to NBA GMs, I talked to maybe 3 different NBA GMs today. Now, one of them was in Cleveland. I wanted to try to get our women's team. Our women's team was playing in Cleveland around Thanksgiving, and I was hoping I could help our women's team get into the Cavaliers facility for practice, but they were practicing that day. Mike Gansey, the GM of the Cavs, is a former Bonnie, and so he, which is awesome to have him there. And I'm close with Kobe Altman, their president, and know Kenny Atkinson, their coach, known him a long time, and so you're still talking with those folks, but our players, most importantly, our players, and talking to one of our players about a couple of our players this morning about their injuries and where they were and how close they were to coming back, and talking to the trainer about where they were, and another player, we've got to get new insoles for his feet. So where are we going to take him to get fitted for these insoles so we can get him back quickly? And I'm learning about different places and how quickly they can get an insole created for a player's mold of his foot. And so, then recruiting, I'm on the phone trying to set up a campus visit and, trying to prepare, we have our NIL deals and trying to prepare offers for potential other players and what those will look like. And then raising money, like every single day. Scheduling, I was on the phone today trying to look at some scheduling for next season. Can we create some revenue off of some games and do some things around this time of the year in exhibitions? And so all of those things in any given day, talked with, the AD about, game night and, can we get a few more courtside seats fit in there that we can sell to create more revenue? Just, but it's fun. I really enjoy it. But at the core of it is our, and I would say is our university community and being there and trying to contribute to that environment and hoping that our players are contributing to that environment. But my favorite part by far is working with our players, and we've got a good group, and I hope we'll be pretty good this year, but just trying to make sure that they're getting everything out of this experience that we can give them. And just like I had in my Bonaventure experience. And so, but you're doing a little bit of all of that every day.
You mentioned name, image, and likeness, and I want to get to that in a second, but I think the fundraising element is important to this as well, because the chasm between a bottom team to a top team in terms of the fundraising is different in college than it is in the professional league. Talk to us about the challenges now of having to fundraise and having to amass more of a financial capital bank to make teams better, to go after better players, what that challenge looks like for those of us that perhaps aren't following that closely.
Well, what's changed in the last year is it went from NIL, which you had to gain, you had to raise outside of your program. You could have a collective. The collective could pay, you could pay the players essentially through the collective to do maybe various charitable things, but you were trying to raise money with your donors through that. And then, different companies that might, we have one player this year who has a couple significant national endorsement deals that we were able to help secure him because he has a unique story and a unique background, and it appealed to some places. But at our level, there's not much of that. But with revenue sharing now, schools can essentially just make their player salaries a line item. And so you have schools in our league that have endowments that starts with a B. Our endowment is not a B, it's an M. It's in millions. 100, it's less. And so all of a sudden now, we all went from raising NIL. The gap was still significant, but now there's schools in our league who are doing $5 million a year, $4.5 million a year. I mean, there's a number without them lifting a finger to fundraise, and then they can fundraise on top of that. We are not in a position yet where they're giving us any revenue. We have to raise all of our money that we're going to spend. And so it's a challenge for me to identify what our payroll is going to be, the contracts that I give out to players, or we give out to players. Now I've got to meet that payroll. And I've got to look 2 months down. I'm like, we've got to get, I haven't raised all the money yet that I need to pay out our team's payroll. We'll get there. I'd like to be working on next year's payroll. I'm still trying to get this year's payroll paid. And that's a challenge. Retention is the key. And we've got 11 new players this year. I was okay with having 11 new players this year because I knew we were going to raise significantly more money, and we did to be able to pay this team. But I'd like to, we're really determined to keep the core of this team together for another year, and that's going to cost more than what it costs to bring them in. They're going to come, they're going to have success, and they're going to have options elsewhere. So how do we elevate our payroll? How do we create more revenue streams? And, some of that is I restarted YouTube show / podcast that will create revenue. I wasn't dying to get back into media. I can't say that but I saw it as an opportunity and to help tell our story, and it gets us out there a little bit, and that's fine. But that's the biggest challenge is the money, and I think for schools like us, the gap in the Atlantic 10 from, let's say VCU, Dayton, St. Louis, GW is well funded. I'm okay. We can be in the bottom third, and we are very much in the bottom third. We just can't be here. We just got to be there. I'm just trying to get us there. And spending the most money, it's just like your favorite pro sports team. I mean, we can go through the list of baseball teams, NBA teams who had the biggest payroll in the league, and they were a disaster, and they might have been in last place. It might have all imploded. Having the most money does not guarantee you will win. But I would say if you have the least money, it probably guarantees you won't win. The difference, though, you'd say, and you'd look at the model of, let's say, the Tampa Bay Rays, right? The Tampa Rays. They'd go up against the Yankees or the Red Sox, and you'd see this giant gulf in payroll. And you'd say, well, they can do it. The difference is when they draft a player, they have control of his rights for maybe 5-6 years before he can become a free agent. We are in perpetual free agency. So we can make a good decision on recruiting a player, identify a player. I feel like we did that this year. Found some guys for what our payroll is. I think its value is higher. We got guys for less money for lots of different reasons. And if this was a professional sports league where it's all collectively bargained, you kind of have them, for lack of a better term, you have them under control. We don't. We're just, everybody's a free agent every year. And that makes it much harder because I think we need to me, we're trying to build 2-year teams. And this group that we have, that can we get the core back, and I think we can be good this year. I think we could be really good next year. If those guys are all a year older, they're in our coach's system, we add some other guys around them, that's our challenge.
What do you see the challenge being for universities, colleges navigating their divisions? Stay in Division II, elevate to Division I. Stay in 3, try to jump to 1. What kind of challenge do you see the universities having now, deciding where they should be, who they should be playing against?
I don't think it's going to be, the movement's not going to be 3-1. It's going to be 1-3. And you saw St. Francis, PA, which, they were just in the NCAA tournament. You saw the University of Hartford a few years ago. They were just in the NCAA tournament. And you're seeing that doesn't necessarily have some, I think there's this perception that if a small school breaks through, St. Peter's goes to the Final 8, which to me is the most incredible thing. If you've ever been to St. Peter's University in Jersey City, and you imagine that school beating Kentucky and beating Purdue, like you can't even fathom it if you've ever been to St. Peter's. And that's a testament to that group and that university. I'm not sure that transformed St. Peter's financially. There's a bump. And so I think this illusion of one March Madness run sets your school up and there's just endless riches, I'm not sure that's how it turns out. So I think you're going to probably see, in fact, you're going to definitely see more schools dropping out of Division I and just saying, this isn't financially viable for us. NIL and rev share, it's going to be really hard to compete without it. And unfortunately, the gulf between the haves and the have-nots is growing. It's like this country, that the rich are taking even more. They're making the rules. The NCAA, the Power Four, right? The Big Ten, the ACC, the Big 12, the SEC, and then the Big East, because they don't have football, it's a little different, but they're still, they have some, a voice. They're literally making the rules. They're telling the NCAA, this is how we're gonna govern. We're gonna have our own investigative branch, which is interesting to me because, are they gonna investigate us? Are they gonna investigate them? I don't mean us, Bonaventure, but I mean our level. And so you can kind of see where it's going, which I think is at some point they're going to break off and do their own thing. And maybe that's with the next NCAA tournament package. It's funny, you look at the expansion of the NCAA tournament and people are saying, oh, hey, we want to go to, we're 68 teams and we're going to go to 70 whatever. And you go, well, that'll be good. That'll be more mid-majors. No, it won't. It'll be the 7-11 SEC team will be the 13th or 14th. And then what they want to do is take all the automatic qualifiers and the bottom, from maybe conferences ranked 8th through 30, let them all play each other for the right to go play a rested power conference team. And so you'll get to 65 teams and there'll be like 4 or 5 mid-majors even left on the first day of the tournament. Like, that's what they want. And so the Cinderella and the mid-major team who, knocks off that high major, like you saw less of it in the NCAA tournament last year. We got to the Final Four. It was 4 1 seeds. And, kind of I didn't come up with this line, but I appreciate it. They don't think any of our teams are good enough to play in their tournament, but they want all of our players, right? And so you used to see like that really, the St. Bonaventure team that went to the NCAA tournament in 2021 that won the Atlantic 10. Those guys had been together for 3 or 4 years, got up to number 16 in the country, went down to Charleston and beat Boise in the first round of a tournament, beat Clemson in South Carolina, and then beat Marquette by 25, and ended up winning Atlantic 10 one of those years and go to the NIT Final Four. That team would be those guys would get picked off in the portal era. They wouldn't have stayed at Bonaventure that length. And so I just think we're in an era where the rich are getting richer, and the rest of us, I try to tell our people all the time, there's no legislation that's coming that's gonna, people say, well, it's all gonna settle down. They're gonna figure, no, it's not, they're not gonna figure it out. The gulf is gonna get greater. And we have to figure out who we are. We cannot sit around, no one's coming to our rescue. So who are we as a school? What is our pathway and our formula to be successful? And I think there is one for us. My 1 year at Bonaventure, I'm more convinced than ever we can do this. We do need, there's a minimum investment that we need to be sustainable with this, but I think there's a way. I try to remind myself every day, this isn't football. I don't need a 30-man recruiting class. I need 8 guys somewhere on this planet who buy into our place, who our place resonates with. And I think we've got it with this group this year. Like, they're going to be really competitive. They really came to our place for the right reasons. They're part of the fabric in a very short time of our school. But now it's our job to try to keep them as long as we can.
I think that speaks to, because I hear a lot of transactional things in that. The business now, the commodification of this, and having to worry about bottom lines, but that to me sounds more transformational, to try to mold and shape and keep that retention part of it. So how do you get a high prospect? Because look, we've got people now that they're being identified, they're not just in their teens, they're younger, that people are going after athletes younger and younger, high school, middle school. How do you get that sell to an athlete to come to a place like St. Bonaventure, because this will be the difference in your life?
So I think the sell is different for different players and their stages. So let's say for the international player, we've had some success recruiting those guys. We've had a long history of doing very well, with international guys, but now it's more, I think, intentional. And there's so many players in Europe, not just Europe, Canada, certainly we recruit heavily. We're right by the border, as you know here. But all over the world. I met a young Gannon player from Australia. We recruited last year New Zealand guys, Australian guys. We ended up with 2 players from Italy, a player from Moscow, Russia, 2 from Canada, and 1 Ireland via Canada. Went to high school in Canada but has an Irish passport. And in the last year, I spent a lot of time in Serbia and Estonia, Switzerland, Sweden, Italy, Germany. And so I think for the really good international player, there's a little more emphasis on development and growth. They all have agents, and I know the agents, and I think for the agents, what I want are the agents or the people around them who are looking at the next 12 to 15 years of that player's career, who aren't as tied into, hey, I want as much money as I can get right away, so I'm going to go to a high major, I'm going to sit on the bench, I'm going to bank that money, but then do I have a career? I think financially, if you're just looking at it from a financial point of view, you come to St. Bonaventure, you come to a school in our league, you produce, you show you can contribute, and your financial worth is really high at the highest level. Our best player last year, we tried very hard to keep him. he's at Kansas, and, I couldn't tell him not to take that offer that he had from Kansas. And so, but I would say with the group we have this year, 18-year-old international players who we hope could come to Bonaventure. We may be the first stop on the way somewhere else for them. Come to a school that has 2,000 students instead of 20,000 students, where you can make a little easier adjustment to American life, to college life, small classes, versus walking into, we went up against a lot of high majors on those guys last year, and we sold for those guys. They saw the development piece, the growth, that they could get their arms around the place. And I hope we can keep them for 4 years. That may not be realistic. But then other guys who are coming down a level, we may be the first stop on the way somewhere else. And then I think our other model is, I think we're the place to go when you've got to get the basketball right. You haven't gotten the basketball right. You took the NIL money somewhere. You picked the big name school. You picked the warm weather and the beach, and it didn't exactly work out. And now you have to show that you could be a productive winning player to maybe try to have some kind of a pro career. So you can come with us with a Hall of Fame level coach in a very good conference in the Atlantic 10, in a place that is basketball crazy, loves college basketball. And then hopefully I can help you with the pro stuff. I can help you. We did a pro day this year down in New York City, where really the only mid-major doing that, where, different schools, usually it's like Kansas or UConn or Kentucky or Carolina, BYU now, who, has a lot of talent, and, they can get 25, 26, 27 NBA teams in to come watch their guys. It's really more of a recruiting tool of it's kind of a recruiting flex that the high majors can do, because the teams see those guys all the time. We took our team to New York City, to the NBA Players Association. We had 24 NBA teams there. Wood had a couple more based on bad travel weather. I called on a lot of my relationships in the NBA. Mike Gansey, the GM of the Cavaliers, got on a plane in Cleveland, flew to Newark, came to our pro day, flew home. And, part of that was, we have a couple guys I think he was interested in seeing, but part of that was relationship with our school, with us, and a number of other GMs were there. Tom Thibodeau spent, we had a recruit at that event, and to have Tom Thibodeau be able to sit and talk to, because he's not working now. Tom's dad went to St. Bonaventure. Tom loves the Bonnies, loves his formative years were listening to the Bonnies on the radio with his dad, or going to the Riley Center. And so Tom's always been really helpful with us, and he's between jobs this year. So to have him there, that stuff goes a long way. We're not recruiting against Danny Hurley and Bill Self and Scott Drew. We're recruiting against other mid-majors and then some of the lower high majors. So for us, that day has a lot of value. And so you're trying to give the guys things, some experiences that maybe they can't get at some of our rivals.
And so you brought up the work you're doing now, recruiting internationally outside of the U.S. How do you see this in relation to right now? Some of the top players in the NBA are from Europe. So what's the relationship between the expanded recruiting and right now a bit of a European dominance in the NBA?
It's Europe, it's I don't know if it's the last 7, 8 straight NBA MVPs. Right? You had Giannis, multiple MVPs. You had Jokic, multiple MVPs. And then you had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Canadian MVP. There's a run here of non-American MVPs, and they're from different parts of the world. 2 things. The money that we are paying players now, we have gutted the young sort of Europe has been gutted of a lot of its young players, and other parts of the world too, Asia, but specifically Europe. Just so many. They used to be they could stay, play for their club teams, get paid a nominal money at this age. Now it's the money is tremendous here, and those young programs, we're recruiting a player on a team, and before we got on a call with him the other day, I was going through his roster and looking at the average age of his pro team in Italy. I shouldn't say where it is, in Europe, and the average age was 27 years old. He was just turned 19. So they're playing with older guys, but for those teams, they're probably putting their money in those older players, less in, an 18, 19, 20-year-old where they can come here and be, paid at a higher level and play, even in our league in the Atlantic 10 at St. Bonaventure, make more than they could make there, fly private charter flights to their games, play on TV, play in big arenas. Where there, it might be a little more driving through the countryside on a bus. Now the arenas and crowds can be significant. So there's just a flood of players coming over. And that's really changed the landscape of American recruiting. And what that has cost is the American high school player. There's just so many fewer scholarships available at our level. I mean, we've been sitting around talking the last week about a couple of high school guys we really like, but they're not going to help us win for years. And we're going to be in the portal with older players. We're looking at the older European player, the older international player. The rules have been laxed on what's professional and what's college. They can come from professional leagues. And so I'm more interested in that 22, 23, even 24-year-old European guy versus that 17-year-old, 18-year-old high school guy in the U.S. Like older wins, and so all of us are chasing these older players, and so I think it's recalibrated for the American high school player. Now Division II, I'm sure for Gannon, for Mercyhurst in Division I, they can get a caliber of high school player maybe they weren't getting because it's trickled down and there's just fewer opportunities at our level.
So one, I want to stick with NBA for a second and let's talk about betting. But two, I'm going to remind the audience, you might have seen some of my helpful colleagues coming around with index cards or looking to collect yours. We are taking questions from you, the audience. Anything that you have, write them down. Our teammates will collect them. They'll bring them up to me. Of course, the most important thing aside from great questions is great penmanship. So let's make sure I can read those. Would love to get through as many of your questions as we can before we conclude today's event. Before we're up against the clock, we still have plenty of time. Let's turn to sports betting for a second, though, because we see now so many different platforms that people can wager on games, and not just games, but in-game play. What's good about sports betting that is helping sports overall? What keeps you up at night about sports betting overall?
I don't have much for the good list. I just don't. I think it's money. It's grown the pot. Congratulations, and probably I was a beneficiary of that at ESPN, so I guess, but you could see it in the NBA. You would talk to players, coaches in real time, and it's not like people hadn't been betting on games. They had been betting. Obviously, it wasn't new. It was done, obviously, whether it was through a bookie or offshore, whatever it was. But these bets where in real time people are betting whether a coach, whether a player is going to score 5 points or more or get 2 rebounds in this quarter, and now they're yelling at the coach from the stands to put that guy back in. He's getting calls at home or hang-ups at home or on his cell phone, and when people lose. But it also opened up, for players, you could, and you've seen it with some of the Jonte Porter, which is, I think he pled on that, and that scheme was revealed. And then with some of the allegations coming up, where again, it's just sharing inside information that, hey, so-and-so is not going to play tonight, which if you know that before the public does, you could go bet on the score, but also those prop bets where you're not necessarily betting. In the old days, it was shaving points it was more of you were just really looking at the team score. Now, individual players could just manipulate a few minutes of their performance, or they could, in some of these cases, essentially fake an injury to come out and get the under, and gamblers could win. I worry more about it, certainly at our level. It's been a little more under the radar because it hasn't hit as many high-profile schools, but there is a gambling scandal going on in college basketball. It looked like yesterday there were a couple players pulled who they had questions about some stuff previously in this, but there's 7, 8, 9 schools, 10 schools who had issues, and their players have been under investigation based on what went on last year, maybe the year before, and it does keep you up at night. These guys have these apps on their phones, easy access. They are inundated with gambling commercials, gambling partnerships, gambling sponsorships, but we're going to tell these guys, but don't you do it. Everybody else around you is doing it. And so it's a great concern for everybody, and it's the call nobody wants to get. The best you can do is try to educate your guys about it and talk to them, but you better really, the character of your guys, who they are, it's more important than ever because, we're seeing it certainly the NBA level, college level, and I'm sure it's not just basketball.
I think it's safe to assume, at least I didn't have this word in mind when we were scheduling this program months ago, the word mafia. I mean, the fact that several days ago, a mafia-backed scheme, allegedly, now we see a coach arrested, we see a player arrested, we see some 30-plus others implicated in these rigged card games that are coming out. And a lot is being talked about, including former ESPN colleague Stephen A. Smith, who was here last year, and some of the implications. But just several days into the opening of the NBA, what does that mean for the league right now? Is this a bruise, a black eye, something worse? What does it mean for the league?
I used to think in this country that there were things you couldn't come back from anymore. There were actions and things that there's no way this person could exist in our world anymore.
Go on.
And then they do, and they do again. So I think the bar has been greatly lowered in this country about what is the end for you and what won't be accepted, tolerated. So I don't know. Are less people going to watch the NBA because this scandal's gone on? I saw the ratings for opening week. Didn't look like it. It didn't look like that less people were watching. I think I agree with you, Ben. There was a time where you'd say that kind of a scandal would be paralyzing for a league. Like scandals aren't what they used to be in this country anymore. And there's just an acceptance of corruption, and there's an acceptance of wrongdoing, and there's an acceptance of unscrupulous behavior that I'm probably not the only one in here who is amazed every day of what is accepted. So while I'm not saying this doesn't have an impact, I think we live in a very different world than we did even a few years ago.
Do you think, though, that college universities maybe is the arena to fix that character building? Thinking about it, I don't mean to turn what is otherwise a conversation largely about sports, your career, where those are heading into a political conversation. But if we are in these times and people still continue to gather around sports the way that they do, a unifier, not a divider, if you, Adrian, had a magic wand, you've got the control, how do we fix it? How do we start to fix it? What's the step forward?
We have professionalized college sports, and it didn't start with, there are some people who have different views on the players earning as much as they had, as much as they are. I didn't hear a lot of uproar when we were paying college coaches $8 and $9 and $10 million, and we have seen just this week. I mean, it is mind-boggling, the buyouts on these contracts in football, $50 million, $60 million. Jimbo Fisher was $75 million a few years ago, right? And so before we start, like, this has been going on. It's looked at differently when it's the players, but the money that has been flowing through the coaches, the administrators, I never see any of the administrators having any of their league meetings at anywhere that isn't beachfront and sunny. And so the players deserve the share of this pot. And it wouldn't be as, I would say, yes, we've got to have some parameters on it. It wouldn't have come to this. You know, the legal challenge is what kind of opened up the gate, because the NCAA refused to do this incrementally. And there was a way to include the players in this that I think you would have maybe a little more of an orderly system. But the greed of the schools to keep all of this for themselves, especially at the high major level, created a world where people went to court and the court cases overturned what was, and opened the door for paying the players. And now it didn't have to be this way. The NCAA only has itself to blame for what looks like just this very lawless Wild West that we're in. I don't think we're putting that back in. You said, should the colleges be the place where there's this character building? And, you know, to me, you better do that you're not going to legislate that in. You've got to, at your school, in your program, in your daily dealings, you've got to try to do that. But to think there's going to be some grand movement, there isn't. This is pro sports now. And schools like ours have to figure out how we fit into it, and if we're going to fit into it.
And I think there's some power to say that it's not defining necessarily what you are by what you are, but perhaps what you aren't, and how you're different in that. I want to turn to some audience questions. One of the things, Adrian, I wanted to talk about was the impact of all of this on women's sports. And here we have a question from the audience that I think blends two topics that I wanted to get to. And one is the portal. Do we see the impact of the portal beginning to take effect with women's sports more?
Yeah, I think you're seeing, there may not be as much money, whether it's women's basketball or, women's softball. There was so much attention on the young woman who was the pitcher at Texas Tech. And it was interesting to me, like, every time she pitched, they had a dollar amount attached to her performance that I don't see them attaching to men's teams. Texas Tech decided they were I think I have the right school. I think that maybe it was a pitcher from, Stanford, but you are seeing the portal impact women's sports more. And I think that's it. To me, it's less the money. I do hope that we can create, I wish it wasn't and this is off track, the portal now allows you to go to a new school every year. And what is going to be lost in that are graduation rates. Nobody's talking about graduation rates anymore. And I learned last year is you have a player who might have 3 years at a school, he wants to come to play for you for your 4th year. And it's really difficult. Can he get a degree from our school? How many credits does he have? You're in better position if that player is going to be a grad transfer. Maybe he's done some summer classes where he's gotten 3 year, it's easy with a grad transfer. And so that is the best case to go to this 5-year model that's being discussed, where you essentially no more red shirts. You have 5 years to complete your college eligibility. And so if you're injured for 2 years, there's no red shirts. You're not going to be, we recruited a guy. We had a guy in on a visit last year who was entering his 7th year of college, but he had lost 2 years with injuries. And so that would go by the wayside. But I do think what 5 years does, I do think it would help with graduation, allow guys to graduate and women to graduate. And I think anything we can do to get that back into the equation, because nobody's talking about it anymore. And we are still in the business of hopefully educating young people and getting them degrees and getting them meaningful degrees and getting them on into the world. But I do worry about Title IX, and I do worry about this landscape. Is this going to be are we with an administration that's going to value Title IX and protecting women's rights, not just with scholarships or funding, but in other areas on college campuses? You can already see a lot of that getting peeled back. That's very concerning. But I would just say wherever there's money and where money's coming in, you're going to see movement. You're going to see schools poaching players from other schools, and that's just the nature of this thing right now for men's sports, certainly, but there's tremendous revenue at the highest levels of women's college sports. Women's college basketball has never been bigger. It's never had more stars. It's never, Lindsay Gottlieb at USC is a friend of my wife and I's, and I've seen the program she's built. Like, I go out to LA, like the USC women are selling out the arena. The USC men aren't necessarily selling out that arena. Should she be paid less? She's got the best player in America in Juju Watkins, who's in every national television ad. I mean, what's the value to USC to have a player who's in commercials with not NIL deals? She's in commercials with LeBron James. She's in commercials with Joel Embiid. If I'm USC and hey, she's got as much value to that university as, or more than other coaches who maybe traditionally would just be paid more. So I think those are good things. There's no question that some of the issues we're going to see on the men's side, though, are going to be on the women's side too.
And taking that to the WNBA, the Caitlin Clark effect, someone's asking what you make of that. Are we finally going to see more people tuning into and consistently sticking with the WNBA now?
I mean, you're already seeing it. I think it's gone through the roof. The interest, because you're seeing college stars who, there's less early entry in women's basketball to the NBA. So college basketball, like it used to do in the men's game when we were all growing up, Michael Jordan played 3 years at Carolina. I mean, it's crazy to think Patrick Ewing and Ralph Sampson played 4 years of college basketball. They didn't leave early. That's crazy to think about. But everybody, by the time they got to the NBA, they were known and they had brands. And now you're seeing the women's game, I think, benefit from that same, from the same thing. I mean, Caitlin Clark was a global star when she was playing at Iowa. It didn't matter whether she was at UConn or USC or what market she was in. She got all the exposure you could imagine by being at the University of Iowa, which, I'm not sure before then they had been a team that, people maybe were tuning in to watch nationally.
From the audience, who in your opinion is the GOAT of basketball? The greatest of all time? Easy question, right?
I tell you what, if you ask me this question 10 years from now, I think it's going to be Victor Wembanyama. I really do.
Why is that?
We've never seen anything like him. You've seen him in his third year. On draft night, and I'll answer the back end of that. On draft night, I remember we went on the air, the draft lottery, to see who was going to win the lottery. And I said that night on ESPN, this is the greatest prospect in the history of sports, period. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to be the greatest player, but we've never had a 7'6" player with his skill. And if you just look at what he's done in the first week of the season, and you saw it, I started hearing about him from my draft guys at ESPN, Gavoni and Schmitz, when he was 14, 15, 16, and but he's not there yet. One of the young Gannon students asked me this earlier tonight. My answer to that is, I think LeBron James has been the greatest the longest, but I think Michael Jordan's best is the best. But I think LeBron's done it over a longer period of time than anybody else did it.
Fitting that you bring up LeBron, because this question is, how much gas is left in the tank?
I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, everybody from his draft class is long gone. I mean, some of the guys, like, they played with him. They went to the Big Three. Now they've retired from the Big Three, and he's still playing, which is like kind of like a retired league. It's unbelievable what he's done, what he's still doing at his age. I don't know. My sense is maybe a year or two more, but it certainly sounds like, he's winding down. But if he wanted to play until he was 45 or 46 and was okay with averaging 10, 11, 12 points a game, he could do it. I don't know. It doesn't seem like that's what he wants to do. He wants to do it at a really high level. Yeah, it's remarkable to think how long he's done it. He outlasted me.
Back to the greatest rivalry in basketball.
Even though they don't play each other, but twice a year, to me it's still Celtics and Lakers.
Why?
I think just the history of the league. It has spanned so many eras, right? The 60s, the Jerry West, Elgin Baylor against the Russell Cousy Celtics. And then, it's just spanned these different eras all the way to, Kobe versus KG. And so I think it's probably got the most mysticism. Ultimately because of Bird and Magic. Bird and Magic was the best rivalry the NBA ever had. And I think people still get nostalgic about that.
This one's from our president, Dr. Ferky Ferrati, who is an avid basketball fan. The Luka trade and skinny Luka. That is it? That is all he's written?
That's true. Both happened, right?
Do you care to comment on either, or should we go to the next question?
Yeah, he came back. Obviously, he came back in great shape, and it was obviously a trade that nobody really saw coming, and there's not that many of those in the league. Typically, you have a sense of, I wasn't around for it. I wasn't engaged in a way that to know about it, but obviously, the history of the NBA, there have been just incredible star players traded to the Lakers that changed their franchise. Lou Alcindor went there, it was Lou Alcindor in Milwaukee, and then obviously later Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, going from Milwaukee to the Lakers. Pau Gasol had an incredible impact. His trade helped them win a couple titles, and even Kobe. Kobe was a draft night trade. The Lakers didn't draft him, but they had a deal in place and were able to maneuver to scare a couple other teams off of him. John Calipari and the Nets scared him off of him at number 8, got him to 13, and did a trade to get Kobe. The Lakers have just always had a knack, and then Lakers get a call one day from the Dallas GM about doing a Luka trade, and it's amazing how many great players find their way to LA.
We've got several questions from students in the audience. One is asking what advice you would give a young sports photographer looking to break through. What advice do you have?
Well, it'd probably be the same with any young person in any discipline of, having a sense of, relentlessness, accepting that there's going to be you get a lot of no's in our business. Breaking into it, you get a lot of no's and trying to either, whether it's as a reporter, trying to break stories or getting a job, but it just takes one yes. And the great thing about photography is, it's an art you can practice. You can go, you don't have to be at the Cavaliers-Bucks game to take a great picture or to take a memorable photo. It's something you can go out and practice, and it's a craft that you're going to get better at, and I think it's something that I think is always going to have value in storytelling. I mean, you think about some of the greatest sports photos. It's a part of sports storytelling, and I think that having the resolve to, but there's fewer. The kinds of jobs that used to be available for young reporters, young photographers, aren't there. Whether it's a newspaper, but it's figuring out the fundamentals of these jobs don't change, but how you deliver, where the photos appear, where stories appear, the mechanisms with which they're going to get shared to people changes, but the fundamentals of the craft don't. And so, you're just going to get better at it by working at it.
Similarly, from a future sports journalist, asking about way to grow, particularly covering mid-majors and smaller schools, what was one thing that you found early in your career that you leaned into that you think made you who you are today?
Just showing up every day. Get out of the office. Get out from in front of your laptop. Get out from in front of your phone and go talk to people. Go learn about people. Go talk to people. Learn about their stories. Learn about their business. Be educated in the world that they exist in, and tell those stories. AI can't do that. You guys ever read an AI sports report? They're horrible. AI is not going to replace good sports writing, and it's not going to replace good storytelling, and it's not going to replace thoughtful, being able to really dig with people, and like that, to me, that will not be replaced. It will replace some of the mediocre stuff, but if you really work at it, and but I think for a young reporter, having access, it's who you have access to. Like you said, if you go over to the Cavs game or the Browns game, you may not get time with Donovan Mitchell or with, I don't even know who the Browns quarterback is anymore. Who is the Browns quarterback?
Currently, Browns quarterback was Joe Flacco. Who's currently Browns quarterback?
Dylan Gabriel, right, the rookie. You're not going to be able to get time with them, but if you're covering the Gannon team, if you're covering the Mercyhurst team, you're covering high school team, those people are dying for you to tell their stories and to tell stories around them, and you're probably going to get time, and then it's up to you to be prepared, to know about them, to know about their landscape, and then to take the time that you get with them to be able to conduct good interviews, talk to everybody around. And those are the kind of clips and stories that you want to share out, that are going to help you get, move up the ladder. But the most important job is the one you have. The most important beat is not the one that you aspire to, or I probably spent too much of my career early on frustrated that I wasn't there. I didn't want to be here anymore. I wanted to be there. And I look back, but it forced me to, when I did get there, I appreciated it. I woke up every day saying to myself, don't screw this up. Like whatever you do today, just don't screw it up. It took a long time to get here. You're lucky to be in these jobs. But I mean, I did a lot of, when I think back to college, and whether it was the Olean Times-Herald, which was the local paper in town, or, freelance for the Buffalo News, and, people gave me opportunities to write and to tell stories, and I didn't make much money doing it. But I looked at it as a craft that I would get better than, and I hope everybody still looks at it as a craft where you're always not worry so much about what the audience is, how much money you're making, but to say, am I getting better at it? And sometimes, typically, if you work really hard at it and you're getting better at it and you're growing, where you're doing it, how much money you make, hopefully that takes care of itself.
I, on a personal note, I cannot say enough how much I appreciate hearing the word craft. Some of the best editors that I've worked with have approached it that way to mentor me. I've tried to pass that on to others. I think that is incredibly invaluable. You brought up football. This is a football question, and people are wondering if there might be a Woj bomb tonight. Any news on who Penn State's next head coach will be? You're among friends.
I'm not going to say it out loud. I did ask Pete Thamel's one of my close friends, and I called him about something else the other day. And I said, who do you think's going to get the Penn State job? And he did tell me a name. I'm not saying it out loud, but that's not for me to share. But, one thing, I don't know who the next Penn State coach is. One thing I wanted to say, and I think what has changed more in my former business, I still call it our business. I'm still invested in it. I want to see the business flourish. I think the biggest thing that changed from the beginning of when I did it until the very end, when I was on my way out, I think what changed the most was, and it's true in our country, it is not just sports reporting, certainly. Your competition isn't the other guy trying to break the story. Your competition to me anymore wasn't the other guy or woman or individuals or outlets who are trying to break the same story to you. Your competition is misinformation now. That's what your competition is as a journalist. If you're at the Washington Post and you're going up against the New York Times, there was a time where, yes, that competition mattered, but misinformation and people's inability anymore to tell the difference between what's credible information and what's just complete bullshit and made up, and that's become its own industry of creating outrage, of dividing people. That is its own media industry now, and that's what worries me more than who else has the trade. I'll give you an example. I was back at Bonaventure for about a week, 10 days last year, and the Hall of Fame basketball class was going in, and Vince Carter was going in the class. And so I was standing on the court with one of our assistant coaches, and there was a student who I think was a friend of one of our players, and our players were working out. And the kid said to me, he said, "Hey, what do you think of Vince Carter coming back again?" And I said, "Vince Carter is coming back." And he said, No. Look. And he's showing me highlights on Instagram of Vince Carter in a Atlanta Hawks uniform, which I think was the last team he played with 5 years ago. But on some Instagram reel, it was being portrayed as Vince played last night somewhere. And I said, "Vince Carter's retired. He's been retired. He's going to the Hall of Fame next week." He goes, "No, he's not. Look, he's playing." And he knew who I was. And he was like, I wasn't just some random guy on campus. Like, I might be the guy to know whether. Now, lots of kids could know Vince Carter wasn't playing in the NBA. But what was really interesting to me was he put no more credibility in me than he did in just this random Instagram reel. Now, this is just something without any consequence. It's just a basketball player. And if he walked away thinking Vince Carter still was playing, the world was no worse place, But there's a lot of other things he could think are real that aren't, that people are being convinced of. And I think about that. I see it all the time, but I walked away, I was laughing, and the coach and I were laughing, but I walked away, I wasn't laughing as much because it spoke to something greater or something worse that's gone on in this country and this world, and it's scary.
Adrian, you appear to be a man who's working no less, maybe even working harder now in your second mountain, doing something you're clearly passionate about, but you've had great accomplishments on your first mountain. And so the final question, we're up against time, and there were so many other great questions from the audience. You'll have to forgive me, we did not get to them. But this question, you have a lot of runway left ahead of you, but this is a legacy question. That if you were to sit down decades from now to write your autobiography or somebody's writing it, what do you think the title of the book will be? What do you want your legacy to have been? People to remember you for, of all the things we've talked about tonight, how we maybe wrap them all together, that pivot from one career to the next, building something. Before you answer that, some time to think on it. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight, and thank you for your great questions, your participation in this. Again, from the alumni of St. Bonaventure to Gannon alumni to current students of each organization, and of course community members, sitting shoulder to shoulder to be able to talk about sports and the future of it, where we're headed, and learn from one of the best to have this moment. I want to remind you that we do have upcoming events coming up on Wednesday, Neil deGrasse Tyson at the Bayfront Convention Center. And we also have an event happening at the Gannon, at the Jefferson Educational Society on Monday of next week. We are back here in the Waldron Campus Center in the Yale room for Michael McFall next Thursday, and a big thanks to Gannon University, tonight's event sponsor, as well as our many other sponsors. Adrian, I gave you a minute to try to chew on that. That's a big question, but right now, from where you're sitting, what do you want your legacy to be, and what might be the title of your autobiography or your biography if somebody else is writing it?
I have the answer on legacy. It didn't take me long to think about that. Donnie Walsh was a legendary NBA executive, actually married, his wife went to St. Bonaventure. She was part of the first class of students at St. Bonaventure, so usually it ties back to that. Donnie was GM in Indiana, GM with the Knicks, and I remember after he left the Knicks, we were talking one day, and he had come in when the Knicks weren't very good and really improved them, and then he kind of got involved in the Carmelo Anthony trade. The owner jumped in and added a bunch of guys. The trade probably didn't work out great for them, whatever. So I was talking with him after he left New York, and I said to him, I asked him some stupid question. We were just talking, and I said, your legacy in New York, I don't think, Donnie, people give you enough credit for what you did there. And he said, Adrian, he said, that legacy stuff, it's all bullshit. He said, do you know what your legacy is? Do your kids still call you? Everything else is BS. My kids still call us. The rest of it, the rest of it's going to be a blur to everybody else.
Kids call your parents, parents call your kids. Folks, thank you for joining us. A round of applause for Adrian and his lovely wife, Amy, with us here tonight. Thank you. Folks, we'll see you again soon. Good night.
Thanks, man. That was a lot of fun.
That was awesome.
Good, thanks.
Yeah.